Windtalkers opens up with a battle scene in some desolate, miserable-looking swamp. Nicolas Cage and his colleagues run around killing Japanese people by the tens, and yet they keep coming. After running around in circles for a while, the men that Nicolas Cage, or Corporal Joe Enders as he is named in the movie, is with, end up getting killed. After a very long, bloody, drawn-out scene, Corporal Enders ends up getting hit by a grenade after watching all of his friends die. The next thing we know, he's in some kind of military hospital, unable to walk or hear. He uses his doctor, a girl by the name of Rita, to help convince the Marine Corps that he is still able to fight. Corporal Enders feels responsible for the deaths of all of his friends, so he decides he wants to go back and fight. He cheats his way through the hearing tests and relearns to walk, and convinces the Marines that it is a good idea for him to go back. The first major twist of the film, however, is that his new position is making sure this Navajo code talker doesn't die. All this time that Enders is recovering from his injuries, a young man named Ben Yazzie and his friend Charlie Whitehorse are learning the Navajo code. Their first languages are Navajo, so they enlist in the army to learn a code that the Japanese cannot understand. Enders and Yazzie don't get off to the best start, because Enders is told that if Yazzie gets taken into enemy hands, he cannot survive. Essentially, Enders has to kill him when captured, so he does not want to be too close of friends. The night before Enders and Yazzie leave, the girl Rita comes back in and there is some attempt at a love story. The next hour or so of the film is basically thousands of Marines getting killed on the Japanese island of Saipan in the Pacific Ocean. Yazzie and Enders start to work together and become better friends, and as a result of this, they start to save more and more Marines with their bravery. It cannot be said whether the producers thought it would make a good movie or if Enders was wearing some kind of uber bad luck charm, but the company therein cannot seem to get a break. Every corner hides a new Japanese ambush, and more of their friends die. At one point, they even have the traditional fireside scene where the young blood takes off his engagement ring and says to his buddy, "Give this to my wife." The friend retorts, "Put that back on, soldier, you're going home." Of course, the next scene, they get tragically fired on in a broad daylight by their own mortars, and he gets killed trying to save a friend. The movie goes on and on with twists and turns that an 8-year-old would have been able to see coming. Finally, they end up having to investigate some rock outcrop that was deemed too quiet by management. Once again, the Japanese pop out of nowhere, and Enders ends up getting shot while dragging Yazzie into a bunker. Surprise, surprise, Yazzie is super bummed because by this time, they're practically inseparable. He survives the war with a slight limp and is able to go home to honor Corporal Joe Enders with his son, convincingly named George Washington, and his wife. This movie covers the Japanese island of Saipan, which was a highly contested piece of land somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It was part of the conquering tear the United States went on in the Pacific campaign against the Japanese. The film stars Nicolas Cage and Adam Beach, with side roles with Christian Slater, Roger Willie, and Peter Stormare. Enders' love interest is played by Frances O'Connor. To be completely honest, this film does not have very much going for it. It stars Nicolas Cage as the main character, which in and of itself makes absolutely no sense as it was supposed to be about the Navajo code talkers and the struggles they went through for their country. Ignoring this fact and moving on with the movie is relatively difficult, but I did. This was a mistake. The movie has so many different attempts at storylines that are never really fleshed out and are not well done. It seems like the producers could not decide whether they wanted a war movie with only shooting and killing, a war story between two newfound friends, a documentary-like thing about code talkers, or a love story between two star-crossed lovers. The making of the movie is not good, although I can imagine it must have been hard to do scenes with thousands of extras running across an entire island while bombs blow up. Still, I feel like they could have done more with the scenes when Nicolas Cage goes apeshit on the Japanese. At least a quarter of this movie is angsty Joe Enders freaking out and waving his machine gun around while screaming. Then it flips to a bunch of Japanese people falling over and yelling because Enders shot in their general direction once or twice. The way that Enders flings his weapon around, you would think he was a 6-year-old playing with his new Nerf gun after drinking a venti caramel frappuccino. Overall, this movie probably deserved up to a half hour of my time and no more. I would watch it over again if I could turn the speed up and fast forward until I got to the few parts with relatively interesting dialogue. This film was actually relatively accurate. One good thing about it is that somebody at some point seemed to have done some research about Saipan. They knew that there were many Japanese people and that the Japanese really wanted to keep Saipan for their own. The producers knew that the Japanese had dug and created large bunkers and placed big guns on the hills of the island. It is also true that the United States was able to storm on, and with many hard pushes, was able to take over the island. The numbers of people that died were incredibly high, and that is, in fact, reflected in the movie.